We've got another great panel now, and I'm going to let them all introduce themselves. But this topic, we're going to start focusing on robots, chatbots, what is going on today in the market in various industries. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Brooke to say a few things about herself.
I'm Brooke Roberts-Islam. I'm the co-director of BRIA, which is an innovation agency based here in London. And we focus heavily on material science in terms of making textiles for the fashion industry and smart textiles, and also sustainable textiles. But as part of the work we do, we touch a number of industries that use robotics. So in September last year, we created a robotic installation at the V&A called Slave Master, where we explored the use of robots in a creative environment in combination with dance and projection graphics. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about that and perhaps also touch on how we used a chatbot to get feedback from the audience.
Fantastic. Jacob.
So I'm Jacob Tomlinson. I work for the Met Office. You've probably heard of the Met Office. We do the weather. That's what everybody always assumes, right? We do the weather. We do a lot more than that. We do consulting services around, what does the weather mean to people? We have the Hadley Centre, which is a leading climate research centre. We house one of the largest supercomputers in Europe in order to do our predictions. I specifically work in a team called the Informatics Lab, which is like an innovation R&D research kind of group. We're a multidisciplinary group that looks into the kind of problems that are facing our organization over the 3 to 5 to 10 year timescale. I've done quite a few projects that are quite interesting and relevant to this area, but the main one I think I'm going to be focusing on this evening is a chatbot that we've had out as a prototype for the last few months on Facebook Messenger.
And Rory.
Hi, I'm Rory McElearney. I'm the Conversational Interfaces lead at Filament. Filament is an AI and machine learning agency. So I'm a chatbot architect, which means I design and build chatbots. And the thing I'm going to be adding to this evening is giving you some tales from the front line and seeing how AI is actually being applied, talking you through some use cases.
Very good. Okay, well, Brooke, I'm fascinated by the way that you subverted the classic dialogue around humans and robots and the way they interact with each other. So tell us a little bit about Slave Master.
Sure. So Slave Master was a collaborative project that we created mostly for the purposes of public engagement, really, and to throw open the question about how robots might change our lives and how we might begin to work alongside of robots. I think for most of the general public, their knowledge of robots and robotics is quite limited, and often it comes from sci-fi films that have a sort of Armageddon type storyline that generates a lot of fear and misconception. So we spoke to KUKA Robotics, which is one of the biggest robotics manufacturers in the world. They do all of the large, heavy-duty robot arms that work in the Jaguar Land Rover factories up in the north of England and other automotive factories. So we started talking to them about how we could maybe change the narrative around robots. And that really chimed in with them because they have some new Cobots that have launched relatively recently that are made specifically for working alongside of humans. So we set about working together with a number of other creatives and some dancers and a digital agency to create projection graphics so we could build a story around this idea of manufacturing, but also creative use of robots. So the installation was at the V&A in September at the London Design Festival. And the way that it played out was we had 2 dancers interacting with the robots, which were on plinths. And the robots were responding to the way that the dancers were moving in the case of the Cobot. And we fed data from the movement of the Cobot in response to the dancer into a projection graphics algorithm, which then reflected the mood of the robot. So we were trying to sort of engender this idea of a kind of communication, if you like, or response from the cobot to the dancer. So it was really sort of a creative question that we were asking, and we invited people who saw the piece to tell us what they thought. And we had a kind of fascinating array of responses, and we learnt a lot about public perception around robots. It was incredible to see children wanting to sort of go up and touch the robots and play with them, and adults sort of broadly, recoiling. And then we sort of opened up a lot of discussions. My co-director's in the front row there. I'm sort of thinking back to it now. We opened up a lot of discussions with people who work in technology and who love the idea that some of the technology they're using is being used creatively. And they began to ask questions, how else could we use this technology? Could we use it for design? Can we use it for 3D printing, which obviously we can. We can use Cobots for 3D printing, that kind of application. Can we use it for painting? Can we draw with it? We can do all these things with robots. So we're sort of opening up this idea that robots are useful tools, but they're also potentially very creative tools as well. I don't want to dominate the panel. So.
Well, we'll certainly be coming back to that. I would draw the links with some of the works. Rory, I'm going to come to you in a moment. Talk about how you've tried to engender some empathy and emotional intelligence into some of the chatbots you've built.
Yes, Brooke. So you're talking about the machine and human working together there. In your case, it's in an artistic sense, but that's very much where the technology is right now. The technology simply isn't there for an AI to do complicated or nuanced tasks most of the time. So when I'm building a chatbot for a customer service function, a lot of the skill in that is about understanding that person and then dealing with the things that you can deal with, then also knowing and understanding when to hand over to a human and to make that as seamless as possible. So in fact, what you're doing is augmenting the interaction between the human and the customer. So just in terms of empathy that Phil mentioned there, there's a project that we worked on for Deutsche Telekom, which was to do with trying to put emotional empathy into their customer service agent. So what we did was we tried to figure out if that human was happy, angry, sad, and then we tailored the conversation or aimed to tailor the conversation as to their mental state so as to better serve them.
Cool. So, Jacob, coming to you. So I know you have built a chatbot in-house in the Met office.
Yep.
I'm curious, why did you take that approach? I know you're in an innovation function, but you wanted that capability in-house? That was the objective?
Yeah, so I mean, the team that I work in is always kind of looking at new things on the horizon, whether that comes from the creative space or the science space or the technology space, and looking at how we can feed those things into improving our organization, going into the future. And so one of the kind of really key functions of our organization is requirements gathering, right? We need to look at these new things and figure out whether they apply to us or not, and where they're useful and whether they're useful. So often, the best way to do that is to just get stuck in and do it. We'll build a prototype, we'll try it out, we'll learn a load of lessons, and those lessons can then go on to inform other decisions. That decision may be we need to now go out to a consultancy and bring them in to build a robust, scalable chatbot. The decision might be to hire new staff to take that on as a permanent function, or the decision might be to not continue down that line of work. Because we can do that in-house, we can do that very quickly and very easily and learn those lessons, and then engage with others in the organization to make those decisions going forwards.
Cool. We'll come back to that in a moment. But I just want to play on this point about the collaboration, the cobots, as you called it, between the human and the machine. Clearly, feigning some sort of empathy of the machine helped the humans to trust their colleague, their robotic colleague. Rory talked about doing that through natural language processing and detecting emotion in the text that someone was chatting to a chatbot with. In your case, you did it through dance and through design. What was the what was the kind of emotional reaction of the dancers and indeed the people that gave feedback over the Facebook campaign?
It was quite varied, actually. Some people were quite terrified by the idea of humans interacting with robots, and it's possible to see why. In the case of the KR6 standard robot, which is a sort of linear axis robot, it's not designed to have anything to do with humans. It's caged, usually. So we set up floor sensors that would allow the robot to stop moving if the dancer came too close. But the Cobot, however, is designed specifically for that interaction. So people's responses were quite different to each robot. With the Cobot, it's designed, and it's very interesting how the visual aspect of that Cobot affects people's emotions too. It's very curved. There's no way to trap your hand in a Cobot because it's been designed to move around and work with a human. There are no trap hazards. And also it has sensors in it so that when you touch it, it will stop. So it responds to human touch. So it depended on the robot, to be honest with you. We had more of a strong, frightened response, I think, to the KR6, the linear robot versus the Cobot. The Cobot was often described as cute and playful, and indeed it's smaller. It's not as intimidating. And also it can't do the sort of heavy payload work that the KR6 can. It's great for gadgets, for sort of meeting the demands of our society that requires, umpteen mobile phones and tablets, and it's great at that sort of very fine sort of electronic work that humans find difficult. So, and obviously what I'm saying to all of you now is what we were talking to people at the V&A about. So they were able to put it in context and at times change their response, one way or another.
So it feels like there's a clue there in designing of robots and chatbots to give them a character, almost human-like character, to bring out an emotional response in the user. So on that path, was there, your user of the Met Office service, the sort of people you were targeting with your chatbot, did you get buy-in? Did you get good engagement?
We did. It was a really interesting experiment. We try and phrase everything as a scientific experiment, right? We come up with a hypothesis, we build a thing, we see if it did that thing, and then start the loop again, right? And from that, we found that lots of people were engaging in the bot. And one of the things that we found people were really engaging with is the fact that the bot could have a bit of small talk, a bit of chit chat.
Yeah.
Right? That would add so much to the kind of core functionality of, is it raining in Southwark? Is it going to rain tomorrow in Southwark? There's kind of standard searches and queries around that kind of thing. But I think one of the really interesting things, which kind of related to what we've just been talking about, is around the fact that this bot is trying to achieve a thing, and it's trying to, not necessarily in this case, instill an emotion in a person, but it's trying to make them think something, make them understand something. And in our case, it's making them understand how the weather applies to them. Right? And that's not the same as trying to make somebody feel an emotion, but it's a very similar concept. And one of the really interesting kind of areas of that is all around probabilities, right? We have this conversation all the time about probabilities. Some people love probabilities, some people hate probabilities. We have a website that will tell you the exact probability of rain over the next 7 days. Some people really like having that, some people really don't. And so being able to provide people with that information, but in a way that they can really, that they like and they don't have to think too much about is something that is kind of a core part of our mission. So one of the things that we found really interesting was looking into how different words relate to different probabilities. If I say the word probably, what does that mean to you? Is that the same as like 70% chance or an 80% chance? If I say maybe or slightly or, might not, or, something like 50-50 or something like that is far easier. It gives you an idea. You literally got the probabilities in there, although that is a common phrase. But there's a really interesting graph that I'll tweet or something that's quite useful, is a poll that was done with a load of people and saying, where would you rank all of these words, right? And then it was a really nice graphic showing kind of, all the different ranges of these different words. And we can then feed that back into the information that we're giving to people. So we can be reasonably sure that if we think that there's a 70% chance of rain, then we might use a phrase that kind of covers 60 to 80% in that chart, right? We know it's going to hit on that mark. And it's a better way of communicating that weather to a person, because we want them to just, at the end of the day, they're trying to make a decision about their lives. And quite often, we can even short-circuit that, right? So instead of you coming and saying, is it going to rain? And I say there's a 70% chance. We can take that step into, it's probably going to rain. But we could also take the step further into you coming to me and saying, should I take an umbrella with me today? And me going, yeah, probably. Right, that's kind of the next step, right? That's the decision that you're trying to make. You don't really care about the weather as a concept. You care about how the weather affects you and affects your life and affects the decisions you're going to make. And we're looking at how the bot can add that value and add these additional features to you so that you can find this information out.
And I found it interesting because we were talking about that just before we came on about. It's about the actual impact that bit of communication has. And in the chatbots that I've architected over the past year or two, I've had to kind of relearn this lost art of communicating through language. I'm so used to doing front-end development and communicating through graphs and charts and things like that. So in that tiny chat window, you only have a small number of characters with which to communicate something. And all of us naturally fall back on heuristics, and we have cognitive biases, and we are not very good at understanding probability. So a lot of what we do, and what I've kind of rediscovered the art of, is choice architecture. So how you present a series of options in text. It's just a fascinating little thing which has come to the surface again, because we're suddenly starting to play as we did, thousands of years ago with conversation, with little snippets of language. Instead of communicating with a white paper or with a graph or with an image, I have to communicate with you with a little snippet of language. So there's all sorts of interesting tricks that the mind plays, which are fun to pick up.
It's definitely one of those interesting areas. For us, the chatbot kind of falls into our digital area, right? We have a digital department that builds our website and our app and all that kind of stuff. And this all kind of falls under the public outreach, and so the chatbot project sits there. But in terms of hiring people to work on these skills and bringing people to work on these projects, a lot of stuff around apps and websites and things, your default reaction is to bring in a graphic designer. Somebody that knows how to graphically convey information to somebody. But in the sense of a chatbot, it's all about the copy, right? You're distilling all of that down into just the words on the page. And that's a skill of being a website designer and an app designer, is putting those words on the page. But in this sense, it's just that. And you've kind of got to peel away all of these skills back to the kind of creative thinking and kind of language understanding that allows you to communicate that information to that person.
Very interesting. Conversation UX is a thing we talk about a lot in our office.
So what sort of skills make good conversational UXs? What kind of people?
I guess it's the same. This is something we also talk about, because when we're trying to hire someone, we're thinking, like, who do we hire? Do we need a machine learning person, front-ender, back-ender, or do we just need someone who writes? Do we literally need like an author? And it's somewhere in between. And the reason is, the UX and the copy that you write at the moment is so linked to the actual technology that if I'm dealing with an API that only allows me to put a certain number of characters in, or to communicate using a certain template or something, if I'm not a developer, I'm going to find it very difficult to navigate the documentation for that, or to prototype it and play it out. So you kind of need that, you as a person need that full stack of writing the copy, doing the code, and also understanding the machine learning stuff underneath as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we could go and put out a job advert for, 5 years of conversational UX experience, right? But we're not going to find that person, right? We need to go and find people that are good communicators for a start, right? People that can think about how to get information from their head into somebody else's head, right? That's all this stuff is really at the end of the day is, can we get data from a machine and put that into somebody's head in a way that they can understand? So it's understanding the really human side of all of this stuff. You know, it's a really technical problem. All of this stuff is all about technology, but the actual problem is a human problem, and it's a really interesting, really.
So maybe back to Brooke. Are these skills in the creative sector? How is the creative sector using AI more broadly, perhaps?
There are many ways, actually. I mean, listening to the guys speak just now, I was thinking back to when we created our chatbot using an app. I think it took us about 10 minutes. In our sort of naive, we need to do a survey, let's quickly make a chatbot. There's clearly a lot more to it. But for creatives who want to simply use the tool, obviously you can grab hold of an app. But in terms of the applications of AI in design, we're working on a project now which is really interesting. We're looking at generative design of garments using machine learning. So we're working on large data sets of certain styles of garments. So for example, 10,000 shirts, and creating generative designs from certain style, color, or fabric requirements within those designs, and potentially linking that to sales. So understanding, for example, for a brand, which is their best-selling shirt, or which fabrics work best for them, and applying those to other designs. So for creative, but also commercial uses. And another case that I think is really interesting is one by Halishan, who was our collaborator on our Slave Master project. They did all of the graphics for us, the projection graphics. They create apps that use facial recognition. And one of the most recent applications of that was the Charlotte Tilbury makeup at the Magic Mirror. Has anyone seen the Magic Mirror? It's in, yeah. So it uses facial recognition and then overlays a number of different makeup looks. So Charlotte Tilbury has created, she's a very famous makeup artist. She's created 8 sort of key women's makeup looks, ranging from the sort of natural, ethereal sort of type of look up to the sort of rock chick with sort of dark eyeliner, mascara, that kind of thing. So obviously her product is packaged together in those looks. So with the Magic Mirror, you look at the mirror and then you swipe through all of the looks, and through facial recognition, it does the virtual makeup for you. So you can see yourself in that makeup before buying it. You can send the picture of yourself in that makeup to your email address. You can Instagram it. You can send it through to the ladies on the till, and they will help you buy all that makeup. So there's lots of interesting, from design through to the sort of commercial understanding of selling product, through to customer engagement, lots of applications of AI.
It's interesting. I mean, that was veering into augmented reality, what you're
Yeah.
superimposing onto, your face.
Yes.
The innovation from a lot of the startups around the country I'm seeing is in that sort of playing field of augmented reality, Internet of Things, and AI. Internet of Things being sort of software-enabled things around us that contextualize our physical environment. I mean, I know some of the work, Jacob, you've been doing in the Met Office involves a lot of IoT-type devices and sensors, and picking up the nuances in the weather and other sources, environmental pollutants, as another example. Where is the innovation in your sector, and what industries is it getting you into?
So I think one of the things that we're really interested in that area is that for a long time, we've bought very expensive, very high precision measurement equipment, right, and deployed that all around the country. And we measure the atmosphere extremely accurately in order to feed our physical models. But everybody's got a smartphone in their pocket these days, basically, and most people have got some kind of temperature sensor, humidity sensor. These are becoming common parts in phones. But those parts are low precision, right? They're not very high quality, and they're not going to give you a particularly good reading. They'll give you a roughly good reading. And one of the areas that we're interested in is, can we take that data from these different, these kind of low precision sources, but much more of it, and then compare that with our high precision data to try and cancel out the noise, right? Try and find, whether there's a useful kind of signal of information in there that can also be fed into that system. And that goes beyond the kind of standard measurements of, temperature and humidity and wind speed and things to things like, well, can we just take CCTV cameras? Can we take really useful open data sets like the Highways Agency's data sets and get weather observation information from that? There's obvious stuff like, is the ground white or not? It gives you an idea of whether there's been snow. But can we look at, can we get a high enough frame rate and look at movement of trees to try and get some information about wind speeds or wind direction or that kind of information? And all that kind of stuff, has to be learned and done statistically by kind of, in our team, we've actually banned the word AI because it means so many things. We try and be very specific about the thing that we're talking about. But, it involves all these different fields of statistics in order to gather that information.
And, one use case that brings it together is quite neat. We're working with a pharmaceutical client that has inhalers and prototyping a chatbot that gives you feedback if you're entering into an area of poor air quality, probably using sources from the Met Office. And that gives you sort of real-time prompts that you may have an asthma attack. Now that's making the pharmaceutical company behind the inhaler relevant to that individual and improving their life on a daily basis. Then it goes over to someone like Rory, who makes that engagement non-intrusive into the individual, but is a value-add utility.
So the two really interesting things I've heard just now are there's this concept of AR, augmented reality. So as well as being an AI machine learning shop, we're also interested in all sorts of future tech. And I'm absolutely sure that AR is going to completely, I was going to say it's going to change the way we see the world, but obviously it quite literally will change the way we see. So there's AI, which we're going crazy about in the office. We're actually working on what we like to think of as the world's first AR-AI mashup. And we're super excited about it because it gives us the ability to look forward into the future a couple of years. So it's for sea life, the aquarium down by the London Eye. So they're a chain of they're a Merlin brand. So we're doing a little proof of concept in there to augment the experience of people going and visiting the aquarium. So you've got like a little friend that's going around with you, and they help you take pictures, and you have an experience, and you can chat to them. Now, the cool thing here and why it's so exciting is because it gives us the chance to zoom forward 5-10 years to when we all have the glasses. Right now, we don't have the glasses. The AR stuff is kind of a pain in the ass. You've got to pull out your phone, and then I'm wandering around with my phone. I don't want to hold up my phone. I want to, it's all very engineered and doesn't feel very natural. The exciting thing about Sea Life is people go in there, they open up the camera app on their phone, and they don't close it. They experience that whole thing entirely through their smartphones already. That's how we will experience the world in 5 to 10 years' time when we've got the glasses. And it gives us the chance to... What I hate about tech solutions is where they kind of insert themselves clumsily where it's not necessary. I love the idea of taking an experience that is happening already, or data that is just floating around there already, and then weaving that into a solution rather than trying to push something in. So this is so exciting because they're already experiencing it entirely through their phones. That's the window through which they see this world, and we're just augmenting that interaction. They're coming away and they're learning more about the fish, more about the different animals. Yeah.
I think that's really interesting because you touched on a point there about inserting technology where it's not necessary. And one of the things that we have within our team is we have another bot, a separate chat bot, which is our kind of team chat bot, right? It sits in our team chat, and we write it kind of ourselves for ourselves, and it's very rough around the edges, right? And it does very basic things, and it's not very good, but it's useful in lots of ways. Yeah. And one of those things is often testing what should be part of a bot and what should not be part of a bot. Because quite often we'll think of something and say, should we add this to the bot? An example was we got some bicycles recently. So we've got 2 buildings. We've got some bicycles so we can cycle back and forth. We've got 2 in our building to go back and forth. And we had a conversation about how do we know where the bikes are, right? Could we have a system where I say to the bot, I'm going to take a bike, and then I take a bike, and then somebody else can go, where's the bike? And the bot can go, oh, Jacob's got the bike. Right? That's a standard kind of bot use case, where somebody else went, why don't we just have 2 hooks on the wall and we put the bike lock keys on, and then we just know whether there's a bike or not. I don't really care who's got the bike. You know, is it necessary to add this to the bot? And in that situation, it was not necessary to add it to the bot. Yeah. But in the other situations where it is useful, where I can ask it how many servers I have running in my Amazon Web Services account, and it can come back and tell me that information without me having to log into the dashboard and do all of that, that's very useful. But there's so many situations where it's over-engineering to try and add it to the bot, and it's really good to be aware of that.
I don't know if you guys both found this, because we've gone through the experience that maybe a lot of you guys will go through at some point in the next few years of building a bot. Were you surprised by how customers used it? Because I know in the Filament case, I'm always shocked and amazed at the things that people say or how people try to interact with it. What was your experience?
I think sometimes people have an idea of what they'd like to say, and they won't necessarily respond to the questions. They just want to get their point across. So we found that people answered, we only had, I think, 5 or 6 questions in ours. It was designed we had tablets at the V&A, and we wanted to be able to get feedback from people whilst they were there. But once we handed it over to them, they would sort of type in anything. But whereas if we read through the questions and then typed them in, obviously they were a bit stricter with their answers. But yeah, it was very interesting. People love to be able to give feedback, I guess. They love to be asked the question. They just don't necessarily want to answer it.
So I really like your example. I think it's a really good use case for a bot, is that kind of thing. Because the number of times you buy a product through a website and it pops up saying, can you fill in a survey for me? And you go, no. Whereas if a little chat window popped up and asked me a couple of kind of language questions, and I just type an answer and press enter, I think that's a really, really interesting way of collecting that feedback. We all, people said all sorts of stuff to our bot, as you'd expect. It's interesting trying to see people intentionally targeting different phrases at the bot, they'll notice that the bot keeps coming back with a templated response. So can they say something to inject words into the template to try and get the bot to say something it shouldn't do? And people really try and push these things and really try and break these things. And it's something we have to be aware of. But also just around the fact that people treated our bot a lot like a search engine. In the same way that you would use a search engine, right? So you type something into Google, you press enter, and it gives you an answer, and you go, no, that's not what I wanted. So you modify what you previously said, and you press enter again, and you get a different set. And you keep tweaking that same search. Whereas we designed the bot around kind of a continuous conversation, right? So saying, what's the weather in Southwark? And it tells you, and then you go, well, what about tomorrow? And it knows we're still talking about Southwark, and so it will tell you for tomorrow. And then you go, do I need an umbrella? And it knows that we're still talking about tomorrow and Southwark, so it'll tell you about the umbrella. But people weren't doing that, right? They were saying, what's the weather in Southwark? What's the weather in Southwark tomorrow? Will I need an umbrella in Southwark tomorrow? And it's like, no, the bot is maintaining this context, but people are not used to that interaction yet. And although the kind of natural conversation is kind of what I think is the correct way for the bot to function, it's not the way that people want to function at the moment. And I'm sure that will change over time, but we need to be aware of meeting the needs of now and aiming for the needs of later with that.
Great. Yeah, good way of summarizing it. I just think I'm always surprised at what people say, and also I'm always surprised that people think that it's like anonymous or private. They don't really realize that a human might actually read this at some point. So we get a lot of fruity comments to the bot. It's always fun reading through those.
So I think that's a good moment to start taking questions from the floor. Nothing too fruity, please. Yes.
So you guys have had experience of developing bots. A lot of what we've heard is about tailoring the response to what the user wants. How much of it about the bot itself adopting its own persona? Because this is supposed to replicate a human conversation where there's two sides to that.
Well, I mean, my opinion on this is that, have people heard of the Turing test? The idea that there's a test that you play where the bot will win, they will beat the test if it convinces a human that it is talking to another human. So I've always viewed that as a bit of a red herring. It's a 1950s sci-fi version of intelligence. which is actually completely different from building a product which serves a consumer need. And we talked a little bit about small talk and giving the bot a little bit of personality, and the fact that making it's possible through little micro interactions with it to feel little slivers of empathy. But we would never try and make a bot that actually purports to be a human, or even aim to make something that is pretending to be like a human, unless that was core to it delivering the content as fast as possible, or booking you a flight as fast as possible. If it was core to that mission of the bot, or indeed we were making a bot that was trying specifically to be a therapy bot that had to be, I can imagine use cases where purporting to be a human is very important, but we don't, that's not even a target on the wall for us to have that.
Yeah, we've often found that, being very upfront about, I'm a bot, I'm going to tell you about the weather, people are very forgiving of it when it goes wrong, right? Whereas if it's pretending to be a human, they just think that, you're being rude or you're being unpleasant to them, right? With a bot, you get a silly answer back and you just think, well, that bot's not, not worked in the way I expected to, but they're more forgiving, especially if it's got some personality, right? Talking about the bot that we have in our team, right? We're really kind of down the personality end with that one. It's really quite interesting to play with it and experiment with it. And as I was saying before, it's rubbish, right? It doesn't function very well because we're constantly messing with it and breaking it and stuff. But we're really forgiving of it because, it's got this character and its personality, and it does something wrong, and everybody's like, silly bot, it's done a thing that's wrong, and, you just carry on. Whereas, that's totally different to kind of serving a consumer need where it needs to you still have those issues where it will go wrong, and it needs to kind of, deflect those problems and kind of absorb the issues around that.
I think we saw a similar thing actually with the physical robots, because the feedback we had from our chatbot survey was that most people felt quite uncomfortable with the idea of humanoid robots. They were a lot more comfortable with the idea of robotic arms, or sort of less human-like robots. It's when androids that are trying to sort of somehow mimic human behavior are put in front of people that they tend to start to feel extremely uncomfortable and respond quite badly. So
it's the uncanny valley.
Yes, exactly. It's just uncomfortable territory.
It's quite interesting in that humans are often not optimized for certain tasks as well, right?
Absolutely.
In the previous panel, we were talking about a bot not being able to make a cup of tea. It's like, well, there's a robot in my office that can make a cup of tea. It looks like a big fridge, and I press a button on it, and a cup of tea comes out. It doesn't look anything like a person, because that would make it worse than it actually is, right? It doesn't need to be a humanoid robot to provide that functionality.
Yeah, that's a really good point,
Yeah, I think there's, going way back, science fiction, we're all sort of fascinated and terrified of replicating humans. But there isn't really a business case for that, to your point, Jacob. There's a business case for robots that augment what we do. And, you've got 7 billion humans that do what we do very well, in fact, staggeringly well. So build augmented robots that help you do various tasks better. And I look at that from a business case point of view, not even an ethics point of view. All right, any more questions? Yes.
I think it's really interesting.
Thank you. I was going to say, I think when you're talking about the cobot side and how they look and this sort of big-eyed, sort of, for those of us of a certain age, if you can remember sort of Johnny Five from Short Circuit, that's kind of appealing. Whereas, I think the Boston Dynamics clip, from, which is a sort of a mix of the Velociraptors of Jurassic Park with Alien plus Anaconda thrown into the mix,
It's quite terrifying.
Slightly uneasy. But I just wondered, you said about the difference between adults and children, and whether, is it that sort of people have seen films and so they're worried because of that, or is it around, we talked about sort of automation and where people step into the role of humans? Is there something you could sort of analyze from what came out of that, about what changes between being willing to engage as a child and then 20 years later starting going, well, this is a bit creepy?
Well, obviously we've had to sort of hypothesize based on the feedback that we've had, and our understanding of the sort of naivety of children and the curiosity of children versus the sort of learnt behavior of adults. And I guess the adults that we spoke to are members of the workforce largely, so they feel that robots could impact, their ability to work or their role in society. So I think as an adult, it's a very different proposition to be looking at the machination of work versus a child who's looking at it, I guess, as an object, an interesting object to be interacted with, especially where the Cobot's concerned, because it's not dangerous in any way. So there's no preconception there. It really was a case of curiosity. And because of the Cobots being safe, there's no need to guard them or have sensors around them, so they're completely approachable. Whereas I guess the adults had learnt behaviour about robots. They'd seen what robots can do or heard about what robots could do and had an instant fear, even though there was no danger around the Cobot. So there's definitely something learnt there. And then I guess there's the interplay of how are these machines going to affect me? What's my identity in a world where there are more and more of these robots? What does that mean for me as a person? I think creative people feel a bit less threatened somehow by robots, creative adults maybe, because they see themselves as outside of that sort of more mechanized world. But of course we can design with robots as well. So but there are lots of different factors at play. I would actually like to understand this subject more. It's incredibly complex, but that's what we learned.
Just on that, the generational divide can also be to do with familiarity with the technology. So an experience we had from building our AR app was that the adults were very impressed by the little animations going on, and the children kind of couldn't care less because they're like, well, of course there's an AR thing standing over there. Yeah, it's no big deal. Who cares? Whatever. They're very used to this idea of technology is just magical and can do anything. They've grown up in a world where, like, if they have to, if the screen is not touch interactable, they're just sitting there hitting a TV, being like, "What are you doing? Change channel." So we found that with the AR app, and also when we're segmenting audiences based on who a chatbot is aimed at, different demographics will interact with it in different ways. I think just through familiarity and the kind of technologies they've come into contact with before.
Cool. Yes.
Hiya, just a question on the slave master installation. I think you said that you actually projected the way that the bots were reacting onto a screen. And I mean, I don't know what word you used, but you said so kind of the way they were feeling. I just think that's really interesting that we talk a lot about how the humans react, but this is actually flipping it round. And I mean, I wondered how you did that or what it looked like.
Yeah, so in order to do that, we had to make some assumptions about what might constitute fear in a robot. So to do that, we decided to use the parameters of torque and speed. So how fast and how acutely was the Cobot recoiling from the human? So we built an algorithm around processing that data through Cartesian coordinates and the speed. And then we had a graphic representation of fear versus the more subtle, gentle movements that it was making when it wasn't interfered with. So broadly speaking, what we did graphically was we had soft, gentle, sort of calm graphics whilst the robot wasn't being interfered with. And then it became a lot more frantic, jagged. We changed the color spectrum when it was being threatened to try to reflect those emotions.
And how did the people interacting with the Cobots then react to their reaction?
So the viewers were watching the performance happening in front of them, and the projection was behind on a huge screen. So I guess it was there was an overall feeling of the intensity rising and there being more tension, both in terms of the graphics and also between the dancer and the Cobot.
I'm just going to pick up on a point Jacob made earlier about banning the word AI in the team, which is a good one, I think, and we've all understood this evening that it covers a broad range of technologies. So just to put you on the spot somewhat, I'm going to throw you a few AI jargon terms, and if you could explain them in 15 to 20 words, using your chatbot conversational UX skills. So let's start with NLP, natural language processing.
Yeah, see, I want to say things like word vectorization and stuff, which is not what we're
not
what we're going for here. Yeah, so I mean, from our point of view, NLP is about taking words and finding the relationships between them, and then structuring that as kind of a probability. You've seen these combinations of words over and over and over. Now here's a new set of words. What's the probability that it is also part of this set, right? And so it's statistical underneath. And this is a really interesting area where lots and lots of players are on the field now making these services as kind of consumable APIs. So in the bot that we've got out on Facebook, at the moment we're using the Microsoft Lewis service, right, which is providing that service to us. And it's useful for us to research the maths behind it, but at the same time we can also, now that we understand what we want, we can buy that service from somebody that can provide it in a more robust way.
Good answer, you failed the 15 to 20 words.
I thought if I did that, you can only ask me a couple more.
Yeah, that's I'm going to give one to Rory, just take the intent management.
So an example of an NLP model is me trying to figure out what you mean by a sentence, by an utterance. So if you said, I'd like a glass of water, I would, when I'm building a chatbot, build it into, I've gone over the 15-word thing, haven't I? Too late.
You see how hard this is.
In for a penny, in for a penny. I would map that utterance to an intent, which is that he wants a water. The machine learning bit here, and this is where word vectorization and clustering comes in, is that we don't need to say, I want a glass of water. The utterance might be, I'd like some water, or I'd like a drink, or something like that. And we know that, let's say we've represented all the words in the English language as like little dots on a map. We know that water is here and water and drink are close together. So I'm able to figure out, even though the words weren't the exact words, that's the intent that he had. The machine learning part is figuring out what are the words that are close together and figuring out what is meant when that person said that. So that's an intent model. What did he intend to say?
Back to you, Jacob. Machine learning. In 15 words.
Yeah, that's mean. I mean, machine learning is statistics at the end of the day, right? It's about, there's lots of kind of subcategories of machine learnings. You've got neural networks, deep neural networks, convolutional neural networks, Gaussian processes, all this kind of stuff, right? These are all just kind of subfields of statistics. And they're all about going from set of inputs to set of outputs and making routes through something, right? If that's a network, it's making routes through a neural network. So it's kind of, if I feed you this information, what information comes out the other side? Mm-hmm. And so, from our point of view, face tracking was mentioned before, right? You have a thing where you have a picture going in, and you have an output on the end, which is there a face or is there not a face? Right? So you put a picture into this network, and that output is yes or no. And so it's all about kind of training based on pictures of faces and not pictures of faces. So from our point of view, we want to know things like, is there a storm in this picture? From this satellite observation, is there a storm? Humans are quite good at looking at satellite pictures and seeing storms. What humans are not so good at is looking at pictures of something that will be a storm tomorrow but isn't a storm yet. Right? So it's almost like doing face detection of a baby to try and find out what the adult will look like, if that makes sense, right? Can I train a model on an adult face and then show a picture of the baby? And I tend to use that as an analogy for a developing storm to a full storm. So that's one of the applications of it.
Very good, and that was cruel of me to put you on the spot, guys. Any more questions from the floor? One over there.
I found tonight's talk really fascinating, but for those of us that are not experts in AI and don't understand all the jargon, which books or what kind of reading material can you recommend to help us understand what those terms mean and what it really means for us day to day?
So it might be useful to say that my background is in IT infrastructure, right? I've been working in this innovation team for 3 years, and that's kind of been my introduction to machine learning and the maths side of this, right? My background is very computer science heavy. So although it's a technical field, it's not the same. So a lot of things that I've learned from is real practical applications of stuff. And annoyingly, there's loads of websites that I can visualize in my head, but I can't remember the link of. So it might be, again, something that I put on Twitter later. But there's lots of stuff around the actual applications of things. So, there's a machine learning thing called style transfer, right? Which is where you take two pictures and you take the style of one and apply it to the other. So you might take a Picasso painting and a photo of your house, and you make a photo of your house that looks like it was painted by Picasso, right? It's about transferring the style and not the content. And the best way to see that, is to go on a website and play around with all sorts of pictures. And there's some awesome tools out there that you just go, this picture, and it makes this thing. And, and all these kind of explanations, and they're kind of interactive and fun. And the same with neural networks and stuff. It's kind of, there's lots of websites where you can drag sliders around and move things, and it kind of shows you, here's a real-life use case, and here's what you're doing when you drag these sliders around. So yeah, I'll make sure I put some useful stuff on Twitter later.
What's your Twitter handle?
It's probably in the Eventbrite thing from this thing, but it's just underscore my full name.
Yeah, in the job market, there's a lot of talk about there not being enough data scientists and machine learning experts and NLP experts. The reality is there's not enough ordinary people that understand use cases that these technologies can do for them. So I don't know if you're a vet or a designer or a textiles expert. Where you can carve your niche is being an expert in something, plus knowing how AI can be applied to your field. And then you've got a massive increase in your value versus everyone else in your field.
I'm a writer, so tell me how I can
This is cool. This is something called use case improv. So for a writer, you might be doing a research for a piece of work, and you might want to run an NLP model, that you now know what that is, which means you can look at a load of academic papers on that topic and pull out the themes, because you've built this model to look out for themes about the topic you want to write on. So that would be a research aid to your writing. You could also use it to put out the first chapter via a blog and then assess the sentiment of your social media reaction and therefore tweak the rest of the book that you write.
That's impressive.
Yeah, she's a plant, I know. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Susie. I'm from the events industry, actually, and I was really interested to hear about the slave master experiment at the V&A. And two questions, really. One is, do you think AI bots will ever be as creative as human beings? I mean, authentically as creative as human beings? And the second question is, how can we get government to fund more of the kind of projects you put on so that it becomes more familiar to the public and less frightening? I'm a fundraiser as well. So.
Okay, so to answer your first question, yes, I do believe in this sort of the limitless capability of creativity of robots, which is a controversial thing to say, and I'm a designer, so it affects me directly. But I do believe that we can. I think the most interesting applications now, though, are where artificial intelligence and robotics can support human creativity. I think it's some time before robots are creative enough to sort of replace a human in that way. So I think right now it's about focusing on the collaborative aspect of AI robotics and human creativity. And the question about funding, that's a tricky one, actually. Most of the funding that's available in robotics at the moment is industry-led. It's not really focusing on creative output and public engagement. But there are some great alternatives. For example, with the Arts Council, who supported our project at the V&A, the Wellcome Trust as well. So there are funds available for this kind of public outreach, but to be honest with you, for us to get our project off the ground, we had to work incredibly hard to engage a number of different private companies to support this. So KUKA and Adelphi Automation, which builds the engineering systems and installs software for the robot use we'd kind of conceived, were huge supporters of us. Rockwell Automation. It was really, I mean, we engaged with the industry in a way that helped them tell their story also. So it gave them a platform to connect with, in the end, 65,000 people who came to see our installation at the V&A. So that was a powerful storytelling tool. So I think, you know, it's a combination of finding funding where you can at this stage, unless it's got an industrial outcome, an economic outcome.
To add to that, from my point of view, I think aligning these things, you know, with lots of different people that have different motivations but are aligned is useful. So one project we worked on a while back was an art installation to do with sonifying data, right? It's a field we're quite interested in, is turning data into sound and then listening to it rather than turning it into visualizations and looking at it, because humans are quite good at hearing repeating patterns within audio data. So that's, you know, that's a field that we're interested in. There was also a project going on locally by a ceramicist who'd made these beautiful pots, and he found that if you hit them, they made a really nice sound. And so he built this whole, he called it the bell house, right? It was this huge wooden structure full of ceramic pots, and he made these robotic beaters that hit the pots. And they all made different sounds because they were different shapes and sizes. And then we added to that project by running meteorological data through this thing to see if we could hear these repeating patterns. And so, you know, they'd gotten funding from the Arts Council, but we had also invested our time because it was an interesting research area for us. So aligning those two things together was really useful.
Cool. Jacob has a very cool job. We're almost out of time. Probably take one more question. Here we go.
Should we ban or not ban artificial intelligence that is self-aware?
Should we, sorry, what?
Ban or not ban? Should we be afraid of this sort of things?
Now, I've had my mind changed on this recently. So I went through the phase, as I'm sure we all did, of being like, oh, it's going to take over the world, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, I dismissed that once I started working in the field, and I realized, oh, it's just maths and statistics. It's not actually.
Aren't we all?
And then, just recently, I've had my head turned by some people who've made me realize that if you were to make something that had the job of the classic example is to make paper clips. So if you were to make a paperclip maximizer. Let's say it's an artificial general intelligence, please make me all the paper clips in the world. And that was its only role, and it was going to just do that as best it could, and it did that to all of us and everything that exists in the universe till the whole universe is paper clips. I always said, well, just turn the machine off, right? Well, actually, no. Part of its task would be to convince the humans that it's not going to do that. So you get into these really interesting mind games of, if it's in the box, it can almost certainly get out of the box.
Do they have self-preservation instinct programmed in? Should we ban that?
It's part of the task. If you give it the task of making paper clips, the task is to escape the box, learn what humans are like, escape the box, kill everything.
Why did I give one more question?
Sorry, I just read about that recently. Anyway, I was convinced. So normally I'd answer that question as, no, don't worry, it's fine. But literally just a few days ago, I heard a very interesting podcast, and now I'm like...
Cool. Any final comments, Brooke or Jacob?
I fear that Slave Master was a waste of time now. Redundant already. That's floored me. No, I think I don't think I have anything else to say. Except I wish you didn't say that.
I mean, yeah, not necessarily closing, but I mean, to maybe not continue that, but to kind of think about that. We as so coming from my engineering background, right? Engineers and developers and things are very much in the mindset of making something that is good enough, right? You're trying to achieve a thing, and you make something that is good enough, right? Take that example of the coffee machine I was talking about before, right? That coffee machine makes acceptable coffee, right? It's not as good as coffee that I could make with my hands, but it makes acceptable coffee and it makes my life easier, and I have no intention on improving that thing. So I don't think that thing is going to take over the world and try and make everything into coffee, because I'm not going to put the effort into making that thing be any better than it is, right?
idea of artificial intelligence and machine learning based on the ability of those things to improve themselves as the definition of what they are. They are improving themselves, making themselves better, and we have no control over what's going to happen next.
There's a little bit of a misconception to do with self-improvement.
Yeah, that's why I asked about self-awareness, because I think this is the step that needs to be, so this is the dangerous step actually.
Yes, and the thing I heard from this podcast is that the technology to do that will get there a full 5 years before we figured out this alignment problem successfully. But honestly, I can tell you from working in the field, that's not where the tech is right now.
I'm worried now, even more. You should be thinking about that.
I promise we will not all be paper clips. I'm sorry if no one sleeps tonight.
All right, fantastic. That was wonderful, wonderful.